The largest artificial mound in Europe, the mysterious Silbury Hill, compares in height and volume to the roughly contemporary Egyptian pyramids. The enormous man-made structure in Wiltshire is thought to have been completed in around 2400 BC. No funerary remains have been found, and the reason for its construction remains unknown. One place where human remains were found is the nearby West Kennet Long Barrow, which I will return to shortly. Silbury Hill stands at a colossal 30 metres high, 98 feet, and 160 metres, 525 feet wide. The incredible undertaking would have taken generations to complete, and it is estimated to have required around 4 million hours of work. It is fashioned from 500,000 tonnes of building materials, comprised largely of chalk, which is abundant in the surrounding landscape. Although it is now covered with turf, it would originally have had bare chalk sides and would have stood out against the landscape. It consists of a core of sarsen stones capped with chalk rubble from the surrounding quarry ditches. The endeavour of creating the monument could perhaps have been a cultural focal point, aimed at fostering a shared culture, and is likely to have taken on a religious or ritual significance, or have had such elements from the outset. TV archaeologist Neil Oliver has espoused the theory that Silbury Hill could be an artificial replica of the natural but modified feature of Glastonbury Tor, which lies just under 50 miles away in Somerset. Both mounds could be seen to represent the concept of a pregnant Earth Mother, or, conversely, they could represent phallic symbols rising from the landscape. The truth is that we don't know for sure. But what is known is that the location clearly had potent religious and cultural significance for those that created it, the Neolithic farmers. The mound itself retained historical significance later in Britain's story also. For a recent geophysical survey revealed that Roman invaders and occupiers built a road and an extensive settlement around the foot of the mound, and in the early medieval period, the top of the hill was thought to have been flattened and became the location of a defensive structure. Silbury Hill is part of the ancient Ridgeway route, close to the Avebury stone circle and not far from Stonehenge, both also hugely significant structures in the Neolithic period, but its closest neighbour is the aforementioned West Kennet Long Barrow. The West Kennet Long Barrow is a chambered long barrow which dates back 5,500 years, 1,000 years older than Silbury Hill. The barrow is around a mile from the hill, up a ridge across open farmland, which, on my visit, was guarded by a herd of fairly protective cows. Excavations have revealed that the barrow was used as a communal tomb, with at least 46 people buried there over a 1,000-year period. Some cremations were also discovered alongside grave goods, including pottery, beads and stone implements such as a dagger dated between 3000 and 2600 BC. The chambers contain the remains of a cross-section of the community, men and women, and from the very young to the elderly. Few complete skeletons were found intact, and it appears that the bones were rearranged or sometimes removed altogether as part of ritual ancestor worship practices. Mysteriously, 4,000 years ago, the tomb was deliberately filled in and the entrance blocked by large stones. In 1859, John Thurnham excavated the western chamber and central passage. He was apparently unaware of the existence of the other chambers, which were not excavated until 1955 by Stuart Piggott and Richard Atkinson. The main passage penetrates around 13 metres, 42 feet, into the barrow, with two of the burial chambers on each side of the passageway and one chamber at the end. On my recent visit, the furthest accessible wall of the barrow was beset with offerings, presumably made by people with New Age beliefs, including candles, apples and other trinkets. Alongside Silbury Hill, West Kennet Long Barrow is a fascinating site, which poses more questions than answers. Chief among these, of course, is the simple question, why? Why would Neolithic farmers undertake these massive projects? And, in the particular case of West Kennet Long Barrow, why would they abandon and close up a site of such obvious ritual significance? Hopefully one day these riddles will be solved. Avebury, the largest stone circle in the world, is one of the greatest marvels of prehistoric Britain. And, as one might expect from such a stunning site, it has been subject to much superstition and religious devotion. But the sheer number of gods and devils associated with the Neolithic monument marks it out, even when set against its neighbour, the more famous Stonehenge. Built and much altered during the Neolithic period, roughly between 2850 BC and 2200 BC, the henge survives as a huge circular bank and ditch encircling an area that includes part of Avebury village. Within the henge, as previously mentioned, is the largest stone circle in Britain, originally of around 100 stones, which in turn encloses two smaller stone circles. Many archaeologists have speculated about Avebury's meaning and usage. One such archaeologist, Aubrey Burl, believed that rituals would have been performed at Avebury by Neolithic peoples in order to appease the malevolent powers of nature that threaten their existence, such as the winter cold, death and disease. But others have postulated more outlandish theories, and it has been associated, often without evidence, with all manner of pseudo-historical and mythological events and characters. These ideas have been derided by Burl as more phony than factual, but they provide a fascinating glimpse into the mindset of some observers when faced with awe-inspiring sights such as this. William Stukeley is one such crank who in the late 17th century claimed the site was built by the ancient British Iron Age priestly caste known as the Druids. This is despite the Druids being present around 2 millennia after the Neolithic period. Another theory, espoused by the Reverend R. Weaver in his The Pagan Altar of 1840, argued that both Avebury and Stonehenge were built by visiting Phoenicians, who he claimed first brought civilization to Britain. In 1872, James Ferguson theorised that the stones were erected in the early medieval period as a commemoration of the mythical King Arthur's final battle, and that his slain warriors, the legendary Knights of the Round Table, were buried there. W.S. Blackett went even further off the deep end and introduced Native American origins. Blackett's Researches into the Lost Histories of America, published in 1883, claimed tribesmen from the Appalachian Mountains traversed the Atlantic Ocean in ancient times and built the megalithic monuments in southern Britain. So-called modern druid Ross Nichols says Avebury was linked to Stonehenge by an astrological axis, and the nearby West Kennet Long Barrow was a symbolic monument to a mother goddess. And when the Anglo-Saxons invaded and settled what would become England, they co-opted the incredible landscape into their own Germanic religion, which venerated the deities Thunor and Woden, who were cognate with the Norse gods Thor and Odin. Sites close to Avebury were etymologically linked to Woden, including Wansdyke, Woden's Barrow and Weyland Hill. They also ascribed another Neolithic site, Weyland Smithy, with their smithing god Weyland, and believed the Long Barrow was the god's forge. Iron Age Britons living in the region would not have known when, why or by whom the monument had been constructed, perhaps having some vague understanding that it had been built by an earlier society, or considering it to be the dwelling of a supernatural entity. After the conversion of the island's people to Christianity by the late medieval period, pre-Christian monuments and practices began to be viewed with fear and outright hostility, and Avebury began to be associated with the devil. Continuing this theme, the largest stone at the southern entrance became known as the Devil's Chair. The three stones that once formed the Beckhampton Cove became known as the Devil's Quoits, referring to a parlour game where a hooped rope is thrown over upright blocks, and the stones inside the north circle became known as the Devil's Brand Irons. At some point in the early 14th century, zealous villagers began to tear down the monument by pulling down the large standing stones and burying them in ready-dug pits at the side. This ISIS-like historical vandalism was thought to have been instigated by a rabble-rousing local priest, with suspects including Thomas Main and John de Hoby. During the toppling of the stones, one of them, which was 3 metres tall and weighed 13 tons, collapsed on one of the vandals pulling it down, fracturing his pelvis and breaking his neck, crushing him to death. His corpse was trapped in the hole that had been dug for the falling stone, and so the locals were unable to remove his body and offer him a Christian burial in the churchyard. Archaeologists excavated the body in 1938 and found that he had been carrying a leather pouch in which were found 3 silver coins dated to around 1320 to 25, as well as a pair of iron scissors and a lancet. From these latter 2 items, they theorised that he had probably been a travelling barber surgeon who journeyed between market towns offering his services, and that he just happened to be at Avebury when the stone felling was in progress. Fear of the devil's vengeance could have been the reason for the stone felling stopping shortly after the man's death. The event appears to have left an indelible mark on the minds of locals, as records show that in the 18th and 19th centuries there were still legends being told in the community about a man being crushed by a falling stone. In the 1930s, archaeologist Alexander Kyler re-erected many of the stones. Avebury has been adopted as a sacred site by many adherents to contemporary pagan religions, and alternative lifestyles and rituals are carried out on a regular basis at the site. Alongside its usage as a sacred site amongst pagans, the site has also become a hub for New Age beliefs, dowsers and so-called psychics. Despite the truth, the lies and the embellishments, it remains a captivating place. A recent trip to the amazing stone circle and associated megaliths, collectively known as the Rollright Stones, provided some fascinating mythological and historical discoveries. The Rollright Stones, in the Cotswolds on the Oxfordshire-Warwickshire border, consist of a stone circle called the King's Men, a single megalith over the road called the King's Stone, and a collapsed dolmen called the Whispering Knights, which is around 400 metres or 437 yards away from the stone circle. There is also evidence of a later burial barrow in the area. The names of the main megaliths are intriguing and give a hint of the local legends of witchcraft in the area. There is even a modern wooden sculpture next to the stones representing a witch, which appears like a giant corn dolly. The King's Men are so called because of a legend that a witch turned a king and his army into stone. The stones in the circle are said to be impossible to count, and if you can count them 3 times and get the same number each time, any wish is yours. The biggest stone in the circle is said to be cursed. According to a legend, it took 24 horses to drag it down the hill, and 2 men were killed along the way. The stone kept flipping over, and local crops failed. Apparently, it only took 2 horses to drag the stone back uphill. The King's Stone has its own legend about a witch who challenged him. The tale of the king read, 7 long strides shalt thou take, and if Long Compton thou canst see, King of England thou shalt be. Off went the king shouting, stick, stock, stone, as King of England I shall be known. On his 7th stride the ground rose up before him in a long mound. The witch laughed and cackled, as Long Compton thou canst not see, King of England thou shalt not be. Rise up, stick, and stand still, stone, for King of England thou shalt be none. Thou and thy men hoar stones shall be, and I myself an Eldon tree. And the Whispering Knights also have a tall tale associated with them. The legend says the knights go down to the brook in the valley to drink on New Year's Day, or when the bells of Long Compton are heard. Legend has it that the Stones were treacherous knights plotting against their king, who were turned to stone by the same witch who cursed the king and the other knights. In reality, the King's Men are thought to date from the late Neolithic, around 2500 BC. The King's Stone was used to mark a Bronze Age cemetery dated around 1800 to 1500 BC, and the Whispering Knights are the oldest structure, being the remains of an early Neolithic burial chamber, thought to date to around 3800 BC and built by the first farmers in the area. Such was the enduring power and reverence of the Whispering Knights that people went on depositing the bones of the dead in the chamber well into the Bronze Age when, far away in Mycenae, the first Greek civilization began to flourish. It's incredible to think that the Whispering Knights are more than 1,000 years older than Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza and are truly ancient, being erected literally at the dawn of human civilization. The King's Men stone circle was not used for burials, but intriguingly was filled with life. It was used for communal ceremonies, and the mind can't help but wander back to those times and imagine what those ancient ceremonies might have looked like and consisted of. Witchcraft or not, the Rollright Stones and the ancient landscape they inhabit is a truly magical place. Breathtaking Weyland Smithy in Avebury in the western tip of Oxfordshire is a vastly ancient site. The Neolithic Long Barrow is situated around a mile from the Uffington White Horse along the ancient Ridgeway route. It's a pleasant and atmospheric walk from the Uffington Castle Iron Age hill fort to the older Weyland Smithy site, which is in a clearing in a small wood. Initially constructed by Neolithic farmers shortly after the advent of agriculture in Britain between 3590 and 3550 BC, it provided the final resting place for 14 people. A far longer barrow or burial chamber was constructed on top of the original structure around 5,500 years ago between 3460 and 3400 BC. Far later, the Anglo-Saxons believed the site was inhabited by one of their gods, Weyland the Smith. They held that the barrow was in fact the deity's forge. Weyland was cognate with the Norse Volund and Teutonic Weyland and was said to have been a blacksmith. This highlights the shared culture and close linguistic relationship between the Germanic languages that all share an Indo-European root. Weyland's story is most clearly told in Old Norse sources in the Poetic Edda, most notably Volundark Vita and Thidrik's saga. The stories tell how the god was taken into slavery by a king and, in vengeance, Weyland kills the king's sons and makes his escape after taking flight with a winged cloak. Weyland and his two brothers were said to have married Valkyries. The deity also makes an appearance in the Old English classic Beowulf and Waldair as an armourer and weaponsmith. Weyland also enters Arthurian legend through medieval Romance literature, with King Riderick Hale giving one of his swords to the mythical wanderer and, in some tellings, wizard Merlin. Rudyard Kipling's Puck of Pook's Hill also mentions the superstition that a horse left overnight at Weyland's smithy with a groat as payment for the god would be shod by morning. The site was excavated, partially reconstructed, and shown to have been the result of compound construction in the 1960s. In 1962-3, Stuart Piggott and Richard Atkinson studied the then neglected monument and found the longer and later mound to be 180 feet long and 43 feet wide at the southern end. The site is now under the protection of English Heritage. Weyland Smithy, like similar megalithic structures and ancient sites along the Ridgeway, like Uffington Castle and Whitehorse, and Avebury and Stonehenge, has become a haunt for adherents to modern paganism in later years. Whatever your beliefs, it is an atmospheric, imposing and truly ancient place. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, share and most importantly subscribe. Thank you for watching.